live. Yo, Wealth Attraction Research. That's right. This is Wealth Attraction Research of the different progress of opulence in different nations. You know what time it is, or maybe, well, for me it's 1800 hours and 37 minutes on Friday, October 13th, 2023. That's Eastern Standard Time. And this is the Wealth Attraction Research segment here, or feature. I don't know, what have I been doing on World Reading Club? But yeah, it's the Wealth Attraction Research presented by Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander on Spreaker Social Podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with exercisingyourmind.com and UniquilibriuM. This edition's reading focus comes to us once again from The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. This is going to be Book 3, titled Of the Different Progress of Opulence in Different Nations. And it's Chapter 1, the only chapter in Book 3. It's actually shorter than I thought it was, but Book 4 it's going in hard. So I'm glad that I'm getting through this right now, because Book 4, as I'm flipping through it, man, Chapter 1 of Book 4 is long. But I'm going to get through it. I've been getting some rest enough lately, so this should work out. We shall see. So I am going to go ahead and just get this going, because what else? What should I should just call this what it is, right? Of the different progress. Let's see, progress of the different progress. By the way, what am I doing? I'm posting this on Facebook. Of the different progress of opulence, OP. There we go. Opulence in different nations, which is interesting because that's the Book 3 title, and it's just slightly different. The Chapter 1, the only chapter in the book, which is of the natural progress of opulence. Of the natural progress of opulence. That's Chapter 1 in Book 3 of Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which was published in 1776, for those of you who don't know who haven't been keeping up. And this podcast is sponsored by blogdealer.com, where you can find products in health, fitness, and fat reduction. That's what I got on there right now. It's just a little list of bullet points of different things you can look through on that site. But for right now, let's get into this chapter and get it done with, right? Let's get it done. So Chapter 1, Book 3, and it's titled Of the Natural Progress of Opulence. And I may or may not make some commentary on it. Just depends on how much or little I understand. But it's going to be short. Let's make it that way. We're in here almost 4 minutes already, so let's get this party started. Oh, look, I have music back here in this thing. I wonder if I should put some. Yeah, I'm going to put Vesper Dust in the background, and I'll let it shock you. Let's see. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. It has some birds and everything there. Alright, so you might hear something interesting in the background while this goes along. Alright. Vesper Dust, by the way, is one of my binaural beat productions you can find at the UniquilibriuM podcast on Spreaker. I believe it's in the Demi-Phase collection, but we'll see. So let's check it out. So this is Of the Natural Progress of Opulence. Alright, so the great commerce of every civilized society is that carried on between the inhabitants of the town and those of the country. It consists in the exchange of rude or manufactured produce, either immediately or by the intervention of money or some sort of paper which represents money. The country supplies the town, but see, that's actually very important. Either immediately, so it consists in the exchange of rude or manufactured produce, either immediately, right? Bartering, like here's some chickens, here's some wood, right? Or by the intervention of money, or listen to this, or some sort of paper which represents money. See, because paper money is not real money. That's the thing, man. I don't know, I keep getting on and on about that. That's because I'm like a dog with a bone here, and I'm hunting this idea about what real money and value is, which is, once again, the produce of the land and the labor of humankind. But let's go. All right, so the country supplies the town with the means of subsistence and the materials of manufacture. The town repays this supply by sending back a part of the manufactured produce to the inhabitants of the country. The town, in which there neither is nor can be any reproduction of substances, may very properly be said to gain its whole wealth and subsistence from the country. We must not, however, upon this account, imagine that the gain of the town is the loss of the country. The gains of both are mutual and reciprocal, and the division of labor is in this, as in all other cases, advantageous to all the different persons employed in the various occupations into which it is subdivided. The inhabitants of the country purchase of the town a greater quantity of manufactured goods with the produce of a much smaller quantity of their own labor than they must have employed had they attempted to prepare them themselves. Okay, so the inhabitants of the country purchase of the town a greater quantity of manufactured goods with the produce of a much smaller quantity of their own labor than they must have employed had they attempted to prepare them themselves. The town affords a market for the surplus produce of the country, or what is over and above the maintenance of the cultivators, and it is there that the inhabitants of the country exchange it for something else which is in demand among them. The greater the number and revenue of the inhabitants of the town, the more extensive is the market which it affords to those of the country, and the more extensive that market, it is always the more advantageous to a great number. This is a common thing, right? All the time. Though I've been learning is just simply the terminology of this. We intuitively know this, right? But he's putting it in the clearest language, at least he could at the time. He says, that the inhabitants of the country purchase from the town, he says of the town, but purchase from the town, right, a greater quantity of manufactured goods, so things that are made, right, with the produce of a much smaller quantity of their own labor. So it took them less labor to trade what they're trading for the things that took a greater quantity of manufactured goods, the labor that it took to manufacture those goods, right, then they must have employed had they attempted to prepare them themselves. So if they decided to take that raw produce and manufacture it into the products and things like that themselves, it would have taken much more labor than them just simply taking the raw produce and selling it to the town that then manufactured it. So they get a greater thing from it. And the town affords a marketplace for the surplus produce of the country. So this is always the thing that gets traded, right? Is a surplus of what we have. If we have more than enough apples for our own personal use and things like that, right? If we have enough for ourselves, then we trade. We have more than enough. That surplus, that's what we then trade for other things. Okay, speaking out loud to myself, getting better understanding. Okay, the greater number The greater the number and revenue of the inhabitants of the town, the more extensive is the market which it affords to those of the country, and the more extensive that market, it is always the more advantageous to a great number. The corn, which grows within a mile of the town, sells there for the same price with that which comes from 20 miles distance. But the price of the latter must generally not only pay the expense of raising and bringing it to market, but afford too the ordinary profits of agriculture to the farmer. The proprietors and cultivators of the country, therefore, which lies in the neighborhood of the town, over and above the ordinary profits of agriculture, gain, in the price of what they sell, the whole value of the carriage of the like produce that is brought from more distant parts, and they save, besides, the whole value of this carriage in the price of what they buy. Compare the cultivation of the lands in the neighborhood of any considerable town with that of those which lie at some distance from it, and you will easily satisfy yourself how much the country is benefited by the commerce of the town. Among all the absurd speculations that have been propagated concerning the balance of trade, it has never been pretended that either the country loses by its commerce with the town, or the town by that with the country which maintains it. A subsistence is, in the nature of things, prior to conveniency and luxury, so the industry which procures the former must necessarily be prior to that which ministers to the latter. As subsistence is, in the nature of things, prior to conveniency and luxury, so the industry which produces the former must necessarily be prior to that which ministers to the latter. So, it's prior to conveniency and luxury. Okay, so subsistence is prior, in the nature of things, prior to conveniency and luxury. Okay, right. So basically, just basic survival, right? Your needs comes before convenience and luxury, right? So food comes before vacations, basically, right? And fancy jewelry. So the industry which procures the former, right, the industry that gets the subsistence, must necessarily be prior to that which ministers to the latter. Okay, so basically saying, so the industry that which makes things that are needed, right, like the food, the farming, and everything, that comes before the industry that makes the luxuries. Okay, good. I'm on point now. Okay, so the cultivation and improvement of the country, therefore, which affords subsistence, must necessarily be prior to the increase of the town, which furnishes only the means of conveniency and luxury. It is the surplus produce of the country only, or what is over and above the maintenance of the cultivators, that constitutes the subsistence of the town, which can therefore increase only with the increase of this surplus produce. The town, indeed, may not always derive its whole subsistence from the country in its neighborhood, or even from the territory to which it belongs, but from very distant countries. And this, though it forms no exception from the general rule, has occasioned considerable variations in the progress of opulence in different ages and nations. That order of things which necessity imposes in general, though not in every particular country, is, in every particular country, promoted by the natural inclinations of man. If human institutions had never thwarted those natural inclinations, the towns could nowhere have increased beyond what the improvement and cultivation of the territory in which they were situated could support, till such time, at least, as the whole of the territory was completely cultivated and improved. Upon equal or nearly equal profits, most men will choose to employ their capitals rather in the improvement and cultivation of land than either in manufactures or in foreign trade. The man who employs his capital in land has it more under his view and command, and his fortune is much less liable to accident than that of the trader, who is obliged frequently to commit it not only to the winds and the waves, but to the more uncertain elements of human folly and injustice, by giving credits in distant countries to men with whose character and situation he can seldom be thoroughly acquainted. All right, so The man who employs his capital in land has it more under his view and command, and his fortune is much less liable to accident than that of the trader, who is obliged frequently to commit it, that is his capital, not only to the winds and the waves, but to the more, and that means, of course, carrying it from one place to another. Usually they were doing it on ships back then, right, with the sailboat. So, who is obliged frequently to commit it, his capital, not only to the winds and the waves, but to the more uncertain elements of human folly and injustice, by giving great credits in distant countries to men with whose character and situation he can seldom be thoroughly acquainted. So he doesn't know, like, if they're honest or not, or if they're even in their situation. He means if they even have the means to repay. Continuing, the capital of the landlord, on the contrary, which is fixed in the improvement of his land, seems to be as well secured as the nature of human affairs can admit of. The beauty of the country besides, the pleasure of a country life, the tranquility of mind which it promises, and wherever the injustice of human laws does not disturb it, the independency which it really affords, have charms that more or less attract everybody. And as to cultivate the ground was the original destination of man, so in every stage of his existence he seems to retain a predilection for his primitive employment. This is interesting because over and over again, Adam Smith drops these little, I don't know, Easter eggs about how he feels about the laws and things like that. Like he just says that I just missed it somewhere about the laws. Like, oh yeah, he says the capital of the landlord, on the contrary, which is fixed in the improvement of land, seems as well secured as the nature of human affairs could admit of. The beauty of the country besides, the pleasure of a country like the tranquility of mind, yeah, there it goes, the tranquility of mind which it promises. So he's talking about the country living. And wherever the injustice of human laws does not disturb it, the independency which it really affords, have charms that more or less attract everybody. And as to cultivate the ground was the original destination of man, so in every stage of his existence he seems to retain a predilection for this primitive employment. Yeah, people would probably like to grow their own food and do things like that and live. I mean, what are people working for? Right? All these jobs and things that people are doing are basically to eat, to have clothes, to have shelter. I mean, of course, there's other types of technology and things, but man, if people could just live in tranquility and peace on their land and have everything they need, there's definitely an interesting situation going on. And I'm not going to get into that because this is going to be a quick one. I only have a page and a half left after this. So this is good times. Adam Smith, this one chapter, book 3. All right, continuing. So without the assistance of some artificers, indeed, the cultivation of land cannot be carried on, but with great inconveniency and continual interruption. Smiths, carpenters, wheelwrights and plowwrights, masons and bricklayers, tanners, shoemakers and tailors are people whose service the farmer has frequent occasion for. Such artificers, too, stand occasionally in need of the assistance of one another, and as their residence is not, like that of the farmer, necessarily tied down to a precise spot, they naturally settle in the neighborhood of one another, and thus form a small town or village. The butcher, the brewer, and the baker soon join them, together with the many other artificers and retailers, necessary or useful for supplying their occasional wants, and who contribute still further to augment the town. The inhabitants of the town and those of the country are mutually the servants of one another. The town is a continual fair or market, to which the inhabitants of the country resort, in order to exchange their rude for manufactured produce. It is this commerce which supplies the inhabitants of the town both with the materials of their work and the means of their subsistence. The quantity of the finished work which they sell to the inhabitants of the country necessarily regulates the quantity of the materials and provisions which they buy. Neither their employment nor subsistence, therefore, can augment, but in proportion to the augmentation of the demand from the country for finished work. And this demand can augment only in proportion to the extension of improvement and cultivation. All right, so the town will basically prosper more through the demands for the manufactured goods that they get back from trading their raw produce, their rude produce, to those townspeople. So they give the rude produce to their townspeople, and the townspeople can only prosper in proportion to what what the country buys back from them in the manufactured goods. So it's a nice cycle that's going on here. So again, he says, the quantity of the finished work which they sell to the inhabitants of the country necessarily regulates the quantity of the materials and provisions which they buy. All right. So how much of the finished work they sell to the inhabitants of the country, how much of it they can sell, that necessarily regulates the quantity of the materials and the provisions which they can buy. So of course, yeah, because if their finished work is not being bought, then they have no way to cycle it back into getting more stuff, getting more of the raw material. Okay, so neither their employment nor subsistence, therefore, can get better, but in proportion to the augmentation, right, or the increasing. So augmentation means also to increase. So, but in proportion to the augmentation of the demand from the country for finished work. And this demand can augment only in proportion to the extension of improvement and cultivation. So the more that the country can cultivate the land through like machinery improvements, technological improvements, like equipment and things like that, and efficiency and people who are skilled, the more they can produce on the land, the more demand they will have for finished products from the people in the town. And again, that cycle just continues. All right, so had human institutions, therefore, never disturbed the natural course of things, the progressive wealth and increase of the towns would, in every political society, be consequential and in proportion to the improvement and cultivation of the territory or country. Had human institutions, therefore, never disturbed the natural course of things, the progressive wealth and increase of the towns would, in every political society, be consequential and in proportion to the improvement and cultivation of the territory or country. In our North American colonies, where uncultivated land is still to be had upon easy terms, no manufactures for distant sale have ever yet been established in any of their towns. When an artificer has acquired a little more stock than is necessary for carrying on his own business and in supply, or when an artificer has acquired a little more stock than is necessary for carrying on his own business in supplying the neighboring country, he does not, in North America, attempt to establish with it a manufacture for more distant sale, but employs it in the purchase and improvement of uncultivated land. From artificer he becomes planter, and neither the large wages nor the easy subsistence which that country affords to artificers can bribe him rather to work for other people than for himself. He feels that an artificer is the servant of his customers, from whom he derives his subsistence, but that a planter who cultivates his own land and derives his necessary subsistence from the labor of his own family is really a master and independent of all the world. That is a very important thing right there. I'm going to read that part again. In our North American colonies, where uncultivated land is still to be had upon easy terms, no manufactures for distant sale have ever yet been established in any of their towns. When an artificer, right, somebody who makes stuff, when an artificer has acquired a little more stock than is necessary for carrying on his own business in supplying the neighboring country, he does not, in North America, attempt to establish with it a manufacture for more distant sale, but employs it in the purchase and improvement of uncultivated land. From artificer, he becomes planter, and neither the large wages nor the easy subsistence which that country affords to artificers can bribe him rather to work for other people than for himself. Wow, it's the freedom. He can't be bribed. It doesn't matter what the large wages or the easy way to get subsistence, where you can just go buy it at a market or trade it like that. You know, like like how most of us do today. We just go to the store and buy stuff. He's like, nah, I'd rather grow it myself. He's like, it cannot bribe him. Yeah, so he says neither the large wages nor the easy subsistence which that country affords to artificers, right, people who make stuff, can bribe him rather to work for other people than for himself. He feels that an artificer, right, one who make, which he was before, right, is the servant of his customers, from whom he derives his subsistence. And he derives his. So the artificer is the servant of the customers, but he derives his subsistence from the customers. Right, so he feels that an artificer is the servant of his customers from whom he derives his subsistence, but that a planter who cultivates his own land and derives his necessary subsistence from the labor of his own family is really a master and independent of all the world. That's a goal right there, right? In countries, on the contrary, where there is either no uncultivated land or none that can be had upon easy terms, every artificer who has acquired more stock than he can employ in the occasional jobs of the neighborhood endeavors to prepare work for more distant sale. The smith erects some sort of iron, the weaver some sort of linen or woolen manufacturing. Those different manufactures come, in process of time, to be gradually subdivided, and thereby improved and refined in a great variety of ways, which may easily be conceived, and which it is therefore unnecessary to explain any further. In seeking for employment to a capital, manufactures are, upon equal or nearly equal profits, naturally preferred to foreign commerce for the same reason that agriculture is naturally preferred to manufactures. All right, so in seeking employment of a capital to a capital, right, employment to the supplies of the money, right, factories are, upon equal or nearly equal profits, naturally preferred to foreign commerce for the same reason that agriculture is naturally preferred to manufacturers. Right, so the artificer chose to be a planter. Independence, I'm guessing he's going there. For the same reason that agriculture is naturally preferred to manufacturers, so is so being a manufacturer is preferred to trading in foreign commerce. Okay, interesting. Okay. So being a manufacturer is preferred before foreign commerce, but agriculture is preferred before manufacturing. All right. As the capital of the landlord or farmer is more secure than that of the manufacturer, so the capital of the manufacturer, being at all times more within his view and command, is more secure than that of the foreign merchant. In every period, indeed, of every society, the surplus part both of the rude and manufactured produce, or that for which there is no demand at home, must be sent abroad in order to be exchanged for something for which there is some demand at home. But whether the capital which carries this surplus produce abroad be a foreign or domestic one is of very little importance. If the society has not acquired sufficient capital both to cultivate all its lands and to manufacture in the completest manner the whole of its rude produce, there is even a considerable advantage that rude produce should be exported by a foreign capital. Wait a minute. Let's go back there again. If the society has not acquired sufficient capital both to cultivate all its lands and to manufacture in the completest manner the whole of its rude produce, there is even a considerable advantage that rude produce should be exported by a foreign capital in order that the whole stock of the society may be employed in more useful purposes. All right, there we go. So if it has not acquired sufficient capital to cultivate all its lands, so if all the land is not being cultivated, and to manufacture in the completest manner the whole of its rude produce, so if there's material left over that hasn't been able to be turned into something manufactured, there is even a considerable advantage that rude produce, right, that stuff that's left over, should be exported by a foreign capital in order that the whole stock of the society may be employed in more useful purposes. All right, makes sense. Continuing, the wealth of ancient Egypt, that of China and Indostan, sufficiently demonstrate that a nation may attain a very high degree of opulence, though the greater part of its exportation trade be carried on by foreigners. Egypt, that of China and Indostan, sufficiently demonstrate that a nation may attain a very high degree of opulence, though the greater part of its exportation trade may be carried on by foreigners. The progress of our North American and West Indian colonies would have been much less rapid had no capital but what belonged to themselves been employed in exporting their surplus produce. According to the natural course of things, therefore, the greater part of the capital of every growing society is, first, directed to agriculture, afterwards to manufactures, and last of all to foreign commerce. This order of things is so very natural that in every society that had any territory, it has always, I believe, been in some degree observed. Okay, once again, according to the natural course of things, therefore, the greater part of the capital of every growing society is, first, directed to agriculture, afterwards to manufactures, and last of all to foreign commerce. This order of things is so very natural that in every society that had any territory, it has always, I believe, been in some degree observed. Some of their lands, so he's saying that in some degree it must have been observed that that's the natural order of things, right? That it's, in some degree it's been observed that it's agriculture, then manufactures, then foreign trade, foreign commerce. Some of their lands must have been cultivated before any considerable towns could be established, and some sort of coarse industry of the manufacturing kind must have been carried on in those towns before they could well think of employing themselves in foreign commerce. But though this natural order of things must have taken place in some degree in every such society, it has, in all the modern states of Europe, been, in many respects, entirely inverted. The foreign commerce of some of their cities has introduced all their finer manufactures, or such as were fit for distant sale, and manufactures and foreign commerce together have given birth to the principal improvements of agriculture. The manners and customs which the nature of their original government introduced, and which remained after that government was greatly altered, necessarily forced them into this unnatural and retrograde order. Wow. That is very complete, I'm thinking. And that's the end of Book 3, which had just one chapter. That was Book 3 of Wealth of Nations, titled Of the Different Progress of Opulence in Different Nations. In Chapter 1, which is titled Of the Natural Progress of Opulence. You've been listening to Wealth Attraction Research, presented by Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander on Spreaker Social Podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and UniquilibriuM. This edition's focus has been brought to us by Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, 1776, and is sponsored by blogdealer.com, BLOGDEALER, blogdealer.com, where you'll find health, fitness, and fat reduction products and some bullet points there. You can choose from lots of stuff. Some really great products on that site, so go check out blogdealer.com. And until next time, this edition of Wealth Attraction Research has come to an end. Stay well.